Welcome to the Freedom Founder Podcast, the show that provides a platform for self-made entrepreneurs to share their stories on how they got where they are today. If you're a budding entrepreneur or a business owner looking for further inspiration, education, or motivation, then look no further. This is the show for you. And now, let's get started with your host, Zach Duggar.
Welcome to the Freedom Founder Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Duggar. Now, if you can think back to your early childhood, the magical moments that you experienced, maybe it was watching a Disney special, maybe it was going to Disneyland or Disney World, or seeing characters from these movies from entertainment that you saw through Disney. There is so much more behind that story and behind those fine entertainment that you've experienced that we're going to talk a little bit about today, but that my guest has dove into in depth and the life and leadership lessons of Walt Disney. So, Jeff Barnes, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Zach, for having me. And I am so looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Now, I understand that you are known as Dr. Disneyland. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was in higher education for more than 22 years. And about a decade ago, I started developing and then teaching what I believe to date is the world's only accredited college course on the history of Disneyland. Now, there are other colleges teaching Disney-type courses, but to the best of my knowledge, none that teach on the history of Disneyland. And the way it reflects U.S. history and the impact that it has had on our culture. And that led to two best-selling Disney success leadership-based books. And now I have the freedom to write and speak and travel the country, if not the world, full-time.
Yeah. Wow, it's a tremendous opportunity that you have gained through that interest and that passion and putting together some curriculum, some programs, some books that you've written on this topic. Now, when you first were teaching on this topic, if I remember correctly, you were experiencing a medical event at the time, and you decided to delay some treatment because you wouldn't have been able to start teaching that course. Is that correct?
Zach, you're a good student. You've done your homework. So yeah, I had dreamed of teaching this course for forever. Had spent a year on developing it, the syllabus, the curriculum, the textbooks, the guest lecturers, the field trips, the assignments. Gave the first lecture. Students loved it, by the way, because our ideas and our dreams, they don't just matter to us, they matter to others. The students loved it. And then the very next day, I was diagnosed with a life-threatening brain tumor. They wanted to operate immediately. And that would have put me out of work for 2 months. And I refused because I was finally doing and pursuing something that I loved. And it really goes back to Walt himself. This year, Disney as a company is celebrating its 100th anniversary. The Disney Brothers studio started in October of 1923. And it's an amazing success story. Today, the world's largest entertainment company. But the story that's not being told is how 100 years ago this month, after Walt goes bankrupt with his first studio in Kansas City, Missouri, he has to make a decision, give up, stay stuck in Kansas City, or go all in on his dreams. And he decides to go all in by boarding the train for California with $40 a single suitcase and a one-way ticket. Well, that's the way I approached this course. I was all in, $40 single suitcase, one-way ticket. And the class wasn't about the amusement park. It was really about what does it take to be successful and to achieve your own dreams. And it involves risk. It involves obstacles. It involves adversity. So this was an opportunity to not just teach the course, but to live the course.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a nice, it's such a comparison that you just drew there between Walt Disney's choice to pursue and take that risk and buy that one-way ticket with that $40 in his pocket and to chase after that dream after experiencing bankruptcy and a failure. And not something that people are often talking about when they talk about Disney. They don't talk about the bumps in the road that got him to where he was able to finally have success. And
Massive boulders in the road.
yeah. Well, could you highlight some of those boulders for us? Because I know we talked about it a little bit previously, and I had no idea.
Yeah. So again, we see the Disney company celebrating its 100th anniversary, world's largest entertainment company. We know the name Walt Disney. We associate it with success. But the story that's gotten lost is, again, the bankruptcy at age 21, by the way. He gets out to California. He creates his first successful cartoon character, which everyone immediately assumes must be Mickey Mouse. But no, it's a little fellow by the name of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And he gets that character taken away from him by a fellow named Charles Mintz and his distributor Universal a year later. That's what forces him to come up with Mickey Mouse. And then, the Mickey Mouse short cartoons are incredibly popular and profitable in the middle of the Great Depression. But Walt never wanted to rest on his laurels. He hated sequels. He didn't want to be repeating himself. And so he had a dream and a vision for full-length animated feature films. His Roy.
Okay. I found this on the web and so he had a dream and a vision for full-length animated feature films.
Even Siri's getting involved. I mean, really.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So
no worries.
He had a dream and he had a vision for full-length animated feature films, but his brother Roy was like, "Why do we need to do this? Stick to shorts, Walt." And then when it came time to do Disneyland, Roy again didn't agree with it. His own wife was out on it. And a lot of the full-length animated feature films, despite the success of Snow White, they weren't profitable and they weren't necessarily successful either. Walt's wife, Lily, said, "I never saw him beaten at anything." And so Walt recognized that no simply means next option. And if you're going to be successful, you simply need to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that must take a lot of intestinal fortitude to be able to have that statement made that Walt was never beaten at anything. But yet, when you look at the actual experiences he went through, a lot of people would have quit probably when he was 21.
Absolutely. And, and he says the difference between winning and losing is not quitting.
Yeah. So as Dr. Disneyland, you had taught this course. Are you still teaching at a university at this point in time?
So I am an adjunct at my former institution. And I for sure go every summer and spend time in residence with their PhD students, which includes, my Wisdom of Walt presentations. I give a tour of Disneyland. But the course itself is now available online to anybody who wants to take it anywhere in the world. Not for college credit per se, but personal and professional development. My real passion at this point is writing and speaking full time.
Okay. And so you have written several books on the topic of the wisdom of Walt. Tell us a little bit about that, about the book series.
Yeah. So before I ever came up with a course on the history of Disneyland, I had said way back in June of '91 that I was going to write a book on Disneyland one day. But I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't think anybody would care if I did write a book. I had no idea how to publish it, how to market it, how to sell it. And so it just became one of these things, that I thought about every now and again. I would, try and work on, but I had, again, no clue how to do it. And then after the medical scare in 2014, and I went back to work, I was really grateful that I was healthy again. I was really grateful that I was back to work. I was really grateful that I, taught the class and, it didn't kill me, even though I was warned that it might. And I reflected on, the fact that at that point, I was 51 years old, and I was like, well, if that had been it, my only regret is that I never wrote the Disneyland book that I said in June of 1991 I was going to write one day. And so I got serious about that. truth be told, I really just sort of got over myself, which I think happens when you face your own mortality for the first time. And so what had been a 20-year idea and 20 years of procrastination, woe is me, I don't know how, on and on and on, the excuses mount, right?
Yep.
I started and finished that project in 142 days.
Wow.
And it became a bestseller. And I was just thrilled that I finally did it. Like, I didn't even care that I actually sold it, to be honest with you. I was just thrilled that, it was done, that it was out of me.
Yep.
I didn't have to die with this book inside me. And it was so popular that my publisher came back and said, hey, people are asking for a Walt Disney World version of this book. And I'm like, well, I was very much like Walt. Well, I don't want to repeat myself. I don't want to do a sequel. But I looked into it and I realized that, the story behind Walt Disney World teaches different life lessons. And so as long as I wasn't really repeating myself, I was perfectly fine with, doing a, Wisdom of Walt book, which became Beyond the Wisdom of Walt, based on the story and history and lessons behind Walt Disney World. Today, I have a Wisdom of Walt blog that goes out every single Wednesday. It's 100% free. And that's going to be compiled into a book and published in early 2024. And then to celebrate the 100th anniversary, I collaborated with an academic from Michigan on a Walt 100 book celebrating 100, fun facts about Walt and Roy, the studio, Disneyland, Walt Disney World, as part of our, own personal 100-year celebration of the Disney company.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's remarkable. I mean, you definitely have dove in, and having gone through a medical event that really did allow you to face your mortality to an extent. Absolutely. Kind of did allow you to get over yourself, and something that you can then push into this book and get that out of you. And then from there, other things have come, another book, and
absolutely.
this continued training, education that you're providing to others.
Yeah. And I want to say something about that, Zach, because for all of his successes, whether it was Mickey Mouse, whether it was Snow White, whether it was Disneyland, at the end of the day, Walt Disney most wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. And we all love stories, right? It's why we read the books. It's why we go to the movies. I think it's story that keeps bringing us back to the Disney parks again and again and again. We all love story. The mistake that so many of us make, however, is we think a story is a happily ever after ending. Well, that's not what's required. Every great story requires conflict. And so if you're kind of bored with your life, bored with your job, bored with where you are, chances are you keep running away from conflict. You keep ignoring the opportunity to do hard and difficult things. You're missing the fact that the obstacles and adversities that you have and are facing are in fact a chance to live a better story and level up in life. So again, I look back on the first of what would ultimately become 2 brain tumors, by the way. I look back on that and it sucked, but it also became an opportunity. And so when we face those challenges, and we see this in Walt over and over and over again, are you going to panic or are you going to pivot? Are you going to implode or are you going to innovate? Are you going to retreat or are you going to be resourceful? And Walt always pivoted. Walt always innovated. Walt always found a way to be resourceful. That's the lesson, and hopefully the challenge that our audience members can hear this afternoon.
Yeah. I mean, that's powerful. I mean, it's not just Walt's story, but your own personal story that is contained within that lesson that you shared right there. Now, when you are speaking in the engagements that you have now, and you're talking about the life and leadership lessons of Walt, what are some of the common or big themes that you talk about in those?
So I'm so privileged because I get to travel the country and the world. I'm headed to Turks and Caicos in the Caribbean this Sunday, and talk about what I love, talk about what I'm most passionate about. And I think there's 2 points to this. First of all, people can end up in a position of supervision or a position of leadership and have no clue what it means to be a leader. And so I work a lot on, what that looks like, how Walt led, what are some of the, principles involved in the Disney company today. And for me, it starts with, as soon as you go to the park, the very first cast member you see will set an example that every other cast member follows. And that is, they'll have a name badge that only has their first name on it. And that goes back to Walt. Walt Disney hated being called Mr. Disney. And in fact, there's a great story of a new cast member who was serving him breakfast on Main Street one morning. She'd never met him. She was super nervous, of course. And so as she was serving breakfast, she kept referring to him as Mr. Disney this and Mr. Disney that. And finally, he stopped her and very politely said, "Young lady, here at Disneyland, there are only 2 Misters, Mr. Toad and Mr. Lincoln. You can call me Walt." And so, Walt didn't believe in organizational charts. And yeah, he owned the company, but he recognized that in order to be a leader, you have to have followers. And so, your title, your position, your org chart, rank, none of that matters if you do not have followers. And I've interviewed Disney Imagineers, Disney legends, people who were hired directly by Walt. And I've asked them, what was it like the day that Walt died, December 15th, 1966, to a person? And, we're 55 plus years away from, that event. But to a person, they tear up and they're so emotionally broken that they're unable to answer the question. That's leadership. That's the impact that he had on each and every one of those individuals. So, when it comes to leadership, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing to have an impact on the people that are following me? Or better yet, do I even have followers? And why not?
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, the fact that you were able to witness some of those individuals that were hired even during that time when Walt was present, and to just see the response that they have when thinking about that time at which he passed away. I mean, that's just demonstrates that impact that he had on their lives as a leader, as a person, an individual. And
Exactly.
I don't know that all leaders always think about that they have that opportunity to impact people in more than just dollars and cents.
I agree. And, I think the most important piece of leadership is the vision piece. So, for example, you step into Disneyland, you're on Main Street, USA, single entrance in, single exit out, which everybody predicted would be a disaster. Disneyland would be bankrupt, shuttered, and forgotten in 6 months or less. And it started with just how awful Main Street was. You're standing on Main Street, and Walt has to give you a reason to go deeper into the park. And that reason is the medieval castle standing at the end of a turn of the century American street. It makes no sense. And yet we can't get down there fast enough. And then once we're in the Central Plaza in front of the castle, we're super curious, like what's in Adventureland, what's in Frontierland, what's in Fantasyland, what's in Tomorrowland. And so, Walt cast a vision for what our day at Disneyland is going to be like, what it's going to look like. And he gives us a compelling reason to follow him down that street. And that's leadership, right? What compelling vision, what compelling reason have you given the people in your organization to follow you, again, beyond rank, title, power, position, and organizational chart?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the vision of the organizational leader that helps to create and shape that process that the individuals that are working within the company are following to meet the end user and the results that they're trying to achieve, and to really bring it forward. I've been in different environments, different companies, different leaders that just seemed really haphazard and that there isn't much of a vision.
Correct.
And I think the people that work in those environments are often transient and not stable in those environments. So would you say in regards to just what you may have learned and experienced, that individuals who worked during that time of Disney being present and involved in the organization, and perhaps even today, that there is stability, longevity with those individuals, that they were kind of, in a sense, sold out to the mission, the vision?
Yeah. Walt understood that, it's about culture.
Mm-hmm.
You can train anyone to do almost anything, but you have to hire based on fit.
Yeah.
And he, when he was putting the park together, he found this guy out of the aerospace industry in Texas post World War II, a fellow by the name of Van Arsdale France. And he said, I want you to put together the training program for our cast members. And Van Arsdale France would go on to found Disney University, which is renowned today, for its training, especially in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
But at the start, Walt did not micromanage Van Arsdale France any more than he did anybody else. He simply said to Van Arsdale France, we're building the happiest place on earth here. So I need you to hire happy people.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
Yep.
I need you to hire happy people. And so it's so interesting to me that, when we're hiring, when we're recruiting, we tend to go for skills and not necessarily look for attitude, for cultural fit, for whether or not this is, compatible. And, Walt recognized the importance of that. In fact, so much so, he almost refused to hire anyone who had already worked in the amusement park business, because he wasn't building another amusement park. He was building a theme park that told stories. And, his wife, Lily, when she found out what he was going to do in building Disneyland, she was like, well, Walt, why would you want an amusement park? Why those places are filthy.
Mm-hmm.
And Walt was like, well, that's the point. Mine will be clean. And so, he was differentiating Disneyland. He was differentiating his brand by not doing what was already out there, but doing something completely new, completely different, and hiring people compatible with that vision versus people who had the skills to run an amusement park, but wouldn't understand the vision because we'd never seen anything like it before 1955.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the differentiation between what he did and what other amusement parks were like at the time, or even present day.
Correct.
Vastly different.
Exactly.
And just fast forwarding a little bit to today, what would you say is a significant impact that the Disney company has had on America or Florida or California, or some of those things that you've seen in your research and understanding that have been influenced by just the presence of Disney and the growth and the size?
It's a great question. I go back to the end of the PBS documentary. It was a 2-part series, American Experience on Walt. And the very last statement was, no one can escape Walt Disney. He affects all of us. And I believe that that's true. He had a massive impact on American history, a massive impact on American culture. A couple of examples of that. Main Street USA is the best idealized version of Main Street that has ever existed. Opens in July of 1955, 3 years before the Eisenhower interstate system comes to fruition, which will systematically destroy main streets across the United States. And then about 30 years later, we would start a revitalization program. And the urban planners across the country looked to Main Street USA at Disneyland for what they wanted to do in bringing Main Street back. That's the kind of impact that he's had. But then I think, secondly, going to the theme parks, have become a rite of passage for many, many, many Americans. On an average day, whether it's Walt Disney World, I think it's higher at Disneyland, but minimum Walt Disney World, any guest at one of those parks, about 70% are returning guests.
Yeah.
They've been there before. And so again, it becomes a rite of passage. And I think for the current generation, the current generation grew up watching Disney movies on VHS tapes over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And that became sort of an indoctrination and a cultural hook, so that now that they have children, they want their kids to, have that same emotional connection and, take them to the parks and experience and see the IPs that, they loved from when they were a kid, growing up with, the Little Mermaid and, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King. And that's a really interesting point, because when the whole VHS thing started, late 80s, early 90s, you had two people running Disney at the time. Michael Eisner was the CEO, but his partner was Frank Wells. Frank Wells was head of finances. And they were really struggling with whether they should, get into that business or not, because, the Disney animated features were classics, and it sort of seemed beneath them to like mass distribute them that way.
Yeah.
And then Frank Wells said, an asset is not an asset unless you use it. And that gave them the green light to start testing, what the market would be for some of these VHS movies. And boy, late 80s, early 90s, as a result of, VHS sales at places like Walmart, they were literally minting money.
Oh, yeah. I still have a shelf of VHS.
And so because kids grew up with the ability to watch the same movie 7 times in a day, they got hooked. And that hook has continued even into the 21st century.
Yeah. Yep. Continues with the name and the celebration of the 100th year. Now, let me ask you another question. I like to ask all of my guests. If you were to be handed $1 million today, no strings attached, to invest in your business or another endeavor, how would you use that and why?
Oh, I would immediately book a trip to the Asian Disney parks, Tokyo, Shanghai, Hong Kong, because I am working on a third Wisdom of Walt book, the Worldwide Wisdom of Walt, which would include stories, lessons from the international parks and the cruise ships. I've been to Disneyland Paris, and I've been on a couple of Disney cruises, but I've not yet been to Tokyo Disneyland. I had that trip booked in May of 2020, and you can guess how that ended. When I've not been to Shanghai or Hong Kong. So I want to finish the trilogy. And that requires doing, that trip. So that would be the very first, thing that I would do is get to Asia and create more content that my, readers and fans are constantly asking for.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a great continued follow-up to the work that you've been doing, and also just to be able to finish that goal that you had started back in 2020 with booking that trip, and to then continue that on. Now, if our guests want to find out more information about the work that you're doing now and just learn more about that wisdom from Walt, what is the best way for them to connect with you or to find the content that you're sharing?
Well, thanks for asking, Zach. You can find me at thewisdomofwalt.com. Again, thewisdomofwalt.com. And there you can, learn about, my speaking availability. You can, find my books there. There's an opportunity to sign up for my free Wednesdays with Walt blog, which again, a collection of that is going to be published in early 2024, but you can get it for free. You don't have to buy it in a bookstore in a few months. And you're also going to be updated on, my history of Disneyland class that again is available online, and any other content that I'm going to be producing. So again, thewisdomofwalt.com. And I'm also on Instagram as Dr. Disneyland.
Perfect. I love it. That's a simple thing to remember, thewisdomofwalt.com, or check them out on Instagram as well at Dr. Disneyland. So, Jeff, I really want to thank you for taking this time to share some of your journey and also some of the life and leadership lessons from Walt Disney.
Well, thank you, Zach, and best wishes to you and to all of our listeners today.
Thank you.